Paranormies, it's Jenna and you're on the light. My light died as soon as I said you're on the light side of the paranormal. Hey Paranormies, it's Jenna and you're on the light side of the paranormal. That was really weird with the light thing. Moving on. So I fell down a rabbit hole. The deepest rabbit hole I have ever fallen down. So last year I watched a docuseries and I really wanted to make a video about it. This is that video. This is my favorite documentary or docuseries ever. And if the only thing this video does is share something I love with you guys, then I'm okay with that. Before we get started, I want to remind you guys to please subscribe to us if you haven't already and go over to our Instagram. We have a lot of subscribers on YouTube and not many followers on Instagram, so you should head over to our Instagram and follow us there. You can also follow Alice and I in our personal lives. Everything will be linked in the description below. The docuseries I'm talking about is called Hellier. It features 2 seasons, season 1 being 5 episodes and season 2 being 10 episodes, with a season 3 in the works. So Hellier is a docuseries that is independently produced and funded by Planet Weird. What I'm going to give you is a brief overview of episode 1. It's a lot. Each episode is about an hour long, I believe, and it is just packed with synchronicities, high strangeness, and so much information. So this is going to be an overview of episode 1, and I hope that I can hook you with this. It absolutely is mind-blowing. So starting this video is hard to do. I don't know where to start. I'm going to do my best. So Greg and Dana Newkirk own the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal. They also have Planet Weird, which is a news and media website, along with the website Week in Weird. They are also paranormal investigators. They started with ghost investigations when they were quite young, and it progressed from there. It progressed into more along the lines of Bigfoot investigations and then UFO investigations, and they settled somewhere in the middle where there's the belief that everything is interconnected. At age 13, Greg and his friends had a paranormal investigation team called Ghost Hunters Incorporated. Not that they were incorporated, just that, as he states, it sounded cool. They had a website which had an email, and they would go around making little documentary series in their teen years, which was a lot of fun for them. But as they got older and things progressed and moved forward, that website, email included, just kind of sat there and did nothing. And Greg would go back and check the email every couple of months just to see what was going on. Now, in one of those times when he went back and checked the email, it was April 2012, and there was a new email sitting there titled, "Urgent help needed, please respond." This was from somebody named David Christie. The email stated,
"Hello, my name is David. I received your contact information through a mutual acquaintance who assures me that you are well equipped to investigate peculiar problems. Furthermore, I believe you may have interest in these events beyond any compensation that I am prepared to deliver in order to have these issues sorted. For the last 6 months, I have been living in a rural home located on the border of West Virginia and Kentucky, where my family is nightly assaulted by creatures that I have come to believe are of an extraterrestrial origin. These beings appear to be the size and stature of a small child, devoid of any facial features, save for large, oily eyes and lipless mouths. They frighten my children by peering through their bedroom windows, chirping at one another. They actively attempt to enter my home in the middle of the night. Last month they took my dog. The police refused to provide any further assistance, attributing the problems to wild animals and forwarding my complaints to the State Game Commission. I believe they are coming from an abandoned mine located on the edge of my property. Though I am armed, I'm afraid that I'm far too frightened to enter the mine by my lonesome and cannot convince my any sympathetic friends to accompany me, though I cannot blame them. I am convinced that the only answer is to collapse the mine. I believe this is where we can be mutually beneficial to one another. If you are prepared to assist me in this matter, I can offer you permission to record and document these events under the condition of anonymity. I can guarantee you evidence of these creatures, which I assure you are not wild animals. Please respond ASAP. Thank you."
So Greg's first thought was, why email me this? Why email this address this information? This address that has been sitting on this old website that has been inactive for years. Not to mention their main page is very unprofessional and informal. Just a bunch of kids in their teenage years holding medieval weapons, and I think their slogan was like, "We're more hardcore than you are." It was just like this fun thing that they had, and they didn't get rid of this website because it housed all these good memories for them, and it was doing no harm sitting there. Greg's other initial thought was that someone was pranking him. This was obviously a prank. Why also contact a paranormal ghost hunter for UFOs and aliens? It didn't match up, and his mind immediately went to the fact that he might be being pranked. So jokingly, he emailed David Christie back saying something along the lines of, "I'm sorry, I don't have much expertise in the alien monster division, but if you'd like to fill me in on some more details, I'd love to hear it." He didn't have to wait much longer for David Christie to reply back with this.
Thank you for your prompt response. I do not blame you for being skeptical of my story. I appreciate you keeping an open mind about my situation, and I am more than happy to provide you with as much information as I am able. I was given your contact information through a man by the name of Terry Wrist. When these disturbances first began occurring, I was only inclined to confide in a personal friend who I knew had fringe interests. He offered to share my concerns with a man that had dealt with somewhat similar experiences in previous years. I accepted his offer. Within a week, I was informed that this gentleman had long since retired from his pursuits of this kind, but was willing to provide me with contacts who may be willing to help. This is how I came to contact you. I do not have an answer to why, other than a referral and a recommendation from a gentleman I do not know personally. I was under the impression that you would have the answer to that question. I am located in Pike County, just outside the town of Hellier, Kentucky. Hellier is located roughly 30 to 60 miles from the borders of Virginia and West Virginia, respectively. Most of Pike County is made of small towns and rural communities. It is not uncommon to go days without seeing my closest neighbors. I moved to this area for the peace and quiet, and have received neither. I have lived in this area for just under 7 months, and in that time, the majority of the harassment has occurred within the past 3. I did not become aware of any strangeness until early December, although that is only when I began to keep record of these events. At first it was merely strange tracks in the snow around my home. I had initially imagined that they were some kind of animal, though it closely resembled a human footprint, minus the heel. At that time I was under the impression that it was simply a single creature. It wasn't until weeks later that I began to suspect that I was dealing with a number of what I thought were individuals hazing me upon my arrival to the area. At this point, I was incapable of keeping my dog outdoors overnight. Any attempt to leave her leashed would result in her barking herself hoarse until she was allowed back indoors. In the weeks leading up to the particular evening, I had awoken to find my shed doors open on several occasions, many of my children's toys missing or moved, and my yard in general disarray. I had already given a report to the police, who were making it increasingly clear that they were not interested in my case, barring physical harm or large-scale theft. The second week of January, I'm having breakfast with my family when my 5-year-old daughter begins talking about the kids without hair. When my wife inquired about these kids, she informed us that she had spent the previous night watching them play in the yard. As you can imagine, this was of some concern. I asked my daughter what these kids looked like, and she told me that they were bald like Grandpa and weren't wearing any clothes. The very same day, I found the wreath that hangs inside our rear porch stuffed into my mailbox. I purchased and installed motion-activated floodlights the following day, and for a time the problem ceased. It wasn't until the end of February that our daughter informed us that the bald kids had returned. I was awoken to the sound of my daughter screaming and rushed to her bedroom, only to meet her halfway in the hall. When my wife and I were finally able to calm her down enough to speak, she told us that the kids were trying to peer in her window, but they couldn't reach and instead had taken to tapping on it. She hasn't slept in her own bedroom since. It was that morning that I phoned the police for the second time, and they responded by finally sending a trooper to our residence. I informed him of the regular mischief and how I was now unable to let my dog outdoors after dusk, and of the bald kids. When we found the ground disturbed just under my daughter's bedroom window, the officer informed me, very matter-of-factly, that we were dealing with an animal, and I'd be better off contacting the Game Commission than waste their resources any further. Almost every day for the following week, I would find some evidence that something or someone had been on my property the previous night. Smudges on the windows were not uncommon, stones from the walkway dragged to the other side of the lawn, and I had found tears in the screen door. On Wednesday the 7th of March, I finally witnessed the kids without hair for myself. The dog woke me up around 1:30 a.m., scratching at the back door and whimpering to be let out. I noticed that the motion floodlight was on, and I went to the kitchen window to check that the shed doors were closed when I realized that I could see the shadow of an individual cast across my lawn. From the angle I was positioned at the window, I could not actually see the source of the shadow or the floodlights. The dog was pacing circles around the back door, and I could hear something rifling through a box on the porch. Filled with more anger than common sense, the only reaction I could muster was to bang loudly on the window and yell, at which point I heard the screen door on the porch swing open and slam against the house. I heard what I can only describe as chirping at this point. Sounded much like a skunk, if more guttural. I then realized that there were more than 2 people on my property, and that the shadow, which had been reacting as if it didn't know which way to run, was quickly joined by another. For a moment, I watched as the shadows chirped at one another. Then I noticed a figure out of the corner of my eye. Standing in the flower bed just to the bottom left of my window was a small humanoid figure, with sickly pale skin, completely hairless, standing roughly 4 feet. It was looking in the direction of the shadows and had clearly come from around the left side of the house, opposite the porch, and had not noticed me as far as I could tell. Its face was devoid of features, save for large round eyes, very reminiscent in shape and color of a bird's eye. It had no nose to speak of, and only a small slit for a mouth. It didn't appear to move its mouth as it chirped, sounding more as if the noises originated from its throat. It was most certainly not a wild animal, and even more certainly not a child. I was too terrified to move, and I watched as the creature hopped to the others, and together they scrambled into the woods on the right side of my property. It was clear that there was at least 5 in the group. I have not mentioned this particular incident to my wife, and the only other person I've spoken to about these creatures are yourself and the close friend who introduced me to our mutual friend, Mr. Wrist. I would prefer to keep things that way and to approach this problem as discreetly as possible. Since that evening, my dog has gone missing from the porch, yet to return, and I can only imagine that his disappearance has to do with these creatures. I have gone looking for him during daylight hours, only to find many of my missing belongings scattered at the entrance of an abandoned mine shaft at the edge of my property. I don't dare go inside. My friend has convinced me that my experience is similar to that of another visitation experience, providing me with material and references that back up his claims. I'm aware of the outlandish nature of what I have told you, but I am afraid that I have no other explanation for what I have seen, at least at this time. I can see no other option than to seal the entrance of the mine. I cannot achieve this on my own, and I am frightened to try. I don't dare share this information with others for fear of ruining my career and the reputation of my family. I am prepared to compensate your travel expenses and offer you unrestricted access to whatever recording equipment that you desire, but only on the condition of complete anonymity. Beyond that, I have no other desire than to be rid of this problem. Please inform me of what you would like photographs of and where to send them. Thank you again.
So Greg didn't really know what to think of it at this point. He has mentioned on several occasions that it sounded just like a really great story and anybody could write a story, but he couldn't just let it sit there. He was a little bit intrigued. So he did email him back and said that they were interested, but he would need some photographs of any evidence that he could provide. David Christie was very adamant on being completely anonymous, as he did state that he was a doctor. Not long after that, David did email Greg some photos. They were photos of footprints in the mud around his home. They were round, chubby-like footprints, like stated before, almost like a human footprint minus the heel, with only 3 toes. And so immediately Greg sent these photos to any outdoorsy person that he knew, some Bigfoot hunters that he knew, to try and debunk these footprints. Could anybody know what they were? Some people suggested they looked bird-like because of the 3 toes. But one thing that was mentioned by some Bigfoot hunters that did stand out was that all of these footprints had dermal ridges, which are skin ridges that are similar to a fingerprint, but on a foot. And it was mentioned that that would be very hard to fake. It indicated a very fleshy footprint. So this really intrigued Greg, and he emailed David back saying, yes, you've got my attention now. I am interested. He didn't hear back from David Christie. 3 months later, he received an email.
My apologies for the time it has taken me to reply to your previous email. The situation at my home had become unbearable, and we chose to stay with my wife's family out of state until an appropriate solution could be reached. I am at my wit's end. This afternoon, my brother and I traveled back to the house for the first time in over a month, as I needed to check on the security of my property and gather some belongings. The house seemed relatively untouched, leading me to believe that the creature's motives were driven by the presence of my family. As you requested, I brought a camera back to the property for the purpose of photographic evidence. While my home was free of tampering, I was able to find a trail of footprints that matched the size and shape of those previously left by the creatures on my property. The prints led to the woods behind my home, following a stream that runs near the mine. My brother-in-law, an avid sportsman, cannot identify the tracks despite his skepticism. Perhaps you know of someone better suited to identify these prints. I will be spending the next 2 nights in my home and will send you more images should the opportunity present itself. I'm looking forward to your thoughts.
So I don't want to attach the photos for copyright reasons. You can easily go on weekandweird.com and check them out. I'm going to link everything in the description below, but they are convincing, I'll say that much. And I know I'm a believer, but in the mud, you can clearly see like the swirling fingerprint ridges. It's very interesting. So Greg gets an email back with more photos.
The creatures came out of the woods last evening. I have enclosed photographs taken to the best of my ability given the situation. I have also enclosed photographs of the creature's footprints alongside a measuring stick. My brother-in-law is not as skeptical as he was when we arrived, and we will be leaving before dark this evening. I look forward to hearing back from you.
So he received the next photos with a measuring stick next to them because originally it had been difficult to tell the size. Was it a big footprint? How big was it? And when they sent the photos alongside the measuring stick, you could clearly see it was about the size of half of a human foot and just the ball of the foot with the toes without a heel. Along with those photos, they received a few other photos of the creature. Now, in true paranormal photo style, they were very dark and hard to see. So Greg adjusted the contrast and they tried to do with it as best as they could. Again, you can go over to Week and Weird and see this. They are creepy, and looking at them does give me the creeps. So one of them is kind of a side profile of what your typical gray alien would be. The large eyes, the pointed head, the white face, but very blurry. Now, I don't know if this is zoomed in or not. God, I hope it's zoomed in, because if this is not zoomed in, this guy got really close to this thing. But the other photo looks like a typical gray peeking around a tree with some leaves and such obscuring its face a little bit. It definitely piqued Greg's interest to the highest, to say the least. Greg emails David back and is like, yes, let's go. We're doing this thing. And he never hears from David Christie again. So this sat with Greg for a while, where you've got this hook in you and you're left like a cliffhanger. He still had so much curiosity around the case. So he had made posts about what David Christie was describing and had anybody ever heard of this in this area. And they came upon a case in 1955 in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, where an entire family, I think it was about 11 people, were at a farmhouse that was being terrorized by what was deemed the Kentucky Goblins. It was a very well documented UFO case because police were involved in this, and multiple people saw a UFO come and crash in this area. And afterwards, these people were being tormented by these Kentucky Goblins. They mentioned that they were about 3 feet tall, that they were often peeking in their windows and had a very specific curiosity when it came to their children. It got very intense, and there ended up actually being shots fired at these creatures, and the family eventually fled. Now, there are police sketches and drawings of what these creatures looked like, and I will insert a picture here. So the description and photos of David Christie's creatures in comparison to these creatures are quite similar. The only difference being are these large elephant-type ears that the Kentucky Goblins had. It was actually thought at the time that they almost looked like they were wearing goggles and a headpiece of some sort. So maybe this was some type of thing that they were wearing, and had that been removed, they'd be left with what David Christie had seen underneath. So this sparked Greg's interest, and it almost seemed like they might be connected. Hopkinsville and Kentucky were further away from each other. This wasn't the same town, but it could be still connected. So the guy who told David Christie to contact Greg said that they had a mutual acquaintance, Terry Wrist. And immediately this struck Greg as off. I mean, looking at the name Terry Wrist, it looks like a regular name, but it's very clearly a pseudonym for terrorist. He was thinking, like, who do I know that might have a pseudonym with this Terry Wrist? And not only that, who would use that in this day and age? And nobody could come to mind, so he decided to Google it. He was Googling Terry Wrist. Only one hit came from that name, and it came from a very obscure UFO-related book from 1994, written by Alan Greenfield, called The Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts. And what this book is about using occult magic rituals to summon extraterrestrials. And it was presented completely as fact. And the only mention in this book of Terry Wrist is in the back at the appendix. There was an interview with Terry Wrist, and he claimed that him and other Vietnam veterans were recruited to go into these underground cave systems and clean out areas where aliens had been living, working, and setting up shop. And Greg states, like, clean them out, and I think that means wipe them out. So while working on another project, Greg and Dana went to Brown Mountain in North Carolina, which is a hot spot for UFOs and extraterrestrial activity. Now on this project, which you get into a little bit later on in the series, they were going there with the intent to be abducted. A lot of people kind of chuckled at that idea, but I think that it worked out better than they had expected, and that's what caused a delay in them wanting to speak about what it was that happened. That's really obscure, but it's quite interesting, and they get into that later. While they're at Brown Mountain, they have a friend that says, you know, while we're here, we should try and find this one area. It's really off the beaten path. This guy had said that a psychic had told him that in this area, there was a cave that was the entrance to one of these alien bases, reminding them of the Kentucky Goblins. So they thought, yeah, let's do this. So after hiking this insanely rough, rugged terrain, which was quite treacherous, they made it to this area that was the mouth of a cave. And Greg said that there was two very large stone pillars on the outside, and then you would go into what would be the mouth of a cave. But interestingly enough, there was a very large rock that didn't look natural. It looked like it had been placed in a way to cover the mouth of a cave. It is also important to mention that there is quite a large military presence in that area, which was also something that they had kept in their mind as well. So this isn't in Kentucky, they're in North Carolina. It is two different things. But the Kentucky Goblins situation is always kind of in the back of Greg and Dana's mind at this point. And in Terry Wrist's interviews, he does talk about there being three main entrances to these underground alien bases, one of them being Brown Mountain. So were they standing at exactly the mouth of the cave that Terry Wrist had been talking about? Shortly after they returned home from this project, Greg received an email from Terry Wrist. All it said was,
"Why did you stop when you were so close? I have something for you. 1 week."
And they were kind of shocked by this and thought, someone's messing with us. And in exactly a week, they got the second email from Terry Wrist.
Hellier was just a symptom. The ink and black are isolated still, and third order MIA. Bear in mind, for every door closed, a window must be opened. The door is closed, the window is open. Use the numbers.
So at this point, they immediately thought somebody was messing with them. It was extremely random. The lowercase letters, the way it was written, spaced out, it was all very strange. But this email used the name Hellier. And yes, they had posted a lot of stuff online about this case. They had never once disclosed the name of the location, and he knew that it was Hellier. Attached to the email was a photo, and the photo was of a slip of paper that had a bunch of numbers jotted down on it. There was 16 numbers altogether, and Greg and Dana had no idea what this was, and the email had said use the numbers. So what did they do? They immediately posted it to Facebook and said, what are these? What could this be? Someone had said, it's a credit card number, and Greg was like, and pulled it off Facebook really quickly. But no sooner did he do that somebody said, it's not a credit card number, it's GPS coordinates. So Greg put the numbers into a GPS. And where did those numbers lead? That GPS coordinate was the location of the Brown Mountain cave that Greg and Dana had recently visited. Nobody knew that they had been there. Nobody had known the location other than the people they were with. They had to trek through the forest and unmarked trails to get there. And they very truly trusted the people that they were there with, knowing that they wouldn't have used this information to trick them. At this point, Dana and Greg were freaked out. These letters struck Greg because John Keel had received letters very similar to this. And now, who is John Keel? John Keel is the man who wrote the Mothman prophecies, the man who popularized the Mothman sightings. And as he dug deeper and deeper into the Mothman, he would receive letters like this saying, stop, stop looking, stop what you're doing. And the Mothman cases had a lot of strangeness and synchronicities around them as well. And John Keel had the window theory, which is that aliens and other creatures don't come from other places, they come from here. And that there are windows in our world where the veil is thinnest, and these creatures can come in and out. But these letters from Terry Wrist were the opposite. They weren't saying, stop what you're doing. They were saying, why did you stop? And they were giving him information, which was confusing. And they also mentioned a window is open. When the door is closed, like at the cave, there is a window that is open. And they never heard from Terry Wrist again. So shortly after that, they got into contact with the daughter of one of the men who actually shot at the Kentucky Goblins in 1955. Through them talking and trying to figure out all this strangeness around Kentucky and the Kentucky Goblins, they found out there's actually a cave or mine opening on that property. And this is what led Greg to figure out the Mammoth cave system. The Mammoth cave system is the biggest underground cave system in the world, and it runs from Hopkins, Kentucky to Hellier. It is all underground caves throughout Kentucky, running through the Appalachians. This sent Greg and Dana down a rabbit hole of cases and cases and cases from the Appalachian Mountains of sightings of people seeing creatures of all sorts near and around the cave openings and the mines and the Mammoth cave system. It was starting to be too much to be a coincidence. The synchronicities were starting to be really wild. So while filming something a little bit different, they weren't in Hellier. They were filming something, and while everyone was wrapping everything up, there was a girl that had been riding her bike around the area watching the filming going on, and she saw that they were done and they were wrapping up, and she approached Greg and Dana and said, "Hey, that man over there said that you guys are monster hunter." And Greg was like, "Yeah, we are. Have you seen any monsters lately?" And she was like, "Yes, I have. Me and my friends see these monsters around these cave openings in the area." And immediately Greg and Dana were like, somebody has put this kid up to this. Somebody is pranking us. And they were looking around and nobody was paying any attention. They didn't have their mics on anymore. Nobody was filming. And so they humored the little girl and they said, "Oh, what did they look like?" And she kind of started to describe them, and they asked her if she could draw a picture. And the first thing she drew was a 3-toed foot. Now, if you're asking a kid to draw the monster and she draws the footprint first, really interesting. 3 toes, even more interesting. And the most interesting is when she drew its face. It was the Kentucky Goblins. The large eyes, the big elephant-like ears, and this officially blew their minds. At this point, Greg and Dana said, "We're not far from Hellier. We've got to go." So not knowing what they're doing, not knowing what they're looking for, they hadn't heard from David Christie, they don't even know where to start, the two of them just decide to drive to Hellier. When they get there, it's a very small community. There's only one store really with a gas station and like a pizza joint, I think it was. And so they thought, well, we'll start here. And once they got there, they kind of realized, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. This is a very small town, you know, you get those vibes. But Dana stayed in the car, and Greg was wearing a lapel mic, and he just started talking to people. She was just filming for the purpose of listening to what was going on. What started with Greg asking a few people, "Hey, have you seen these creatures? Or do you know anything about them?" turned into multiple people showing up. People were calling their friends, "You gotta get down here." Tons of people were showing up and talking to Greg about this. There were so many stories. Turns out that there was quite a large UFO sighting a few years back in that area, where there were pretty clear photos taken that as this thing hovered in the air for hours. So after this, they decide, let's just drive around. It's a small town. Maybe we can find David Christie's house. Sure enough, they find on the outskirts this abandoned house. Looked like it was abandoned for about 2 or 3 years, which would line up with David Christie leaving. There were toys out in the yard. There was a shed like he described that he could see from the kitchen window. There was the window with a flower bed where the creature could have been standing, and Dana described as just feeling like this was it. And they went home and decided, okay, this is it. There's so much information. David Christie's situation set aside because we can't contact him anymore. But there's too many coincidences. This whole Hellier, Kentucky Goblin idea, the Mammoth cave system, we need to go to Hellier we need to research this town. And that's where episode 1 leaves off. That's just a brief overview of what started this case, and the rabbit hole just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. I really hope that you found this as interesting as I did. Obviously, me talking to you about it is not nearly as interesting as watching the docuseries, so I highly suggest that you go and watch it. Please comment down below if you would like me to continue to make these story-style recaps of the Hellier series. Or I can just make this a one-time thing where I've tried to hook you into watching the docuseries. But I absolutely love this. This grabbed me so much, and I think because it's so relatable, it would be very easy for Alice and I to receive an email like this where you just start spiraling down this rabbit hole that you didn't know existed. So please let me know. Will you watch Hellier? If you made it to the end, please give this video a like. That helps us out a whole lot. And that's it for me tonight, guys. So keep on creeping on. Bye.